buenas tardes a todas y todos honorables miembros del Presidio, invitados e invitadas especiales que nos distinguen el día de hoy con su presencia. Querida comunidad universitaria, en nombre de la Dirección de Educación Continua, les damos la más cordial bienvenida a la Universidad Iberoamericana, Ciudad de México, a este magno evento, la NASA en la Ibero, un fascinante viaje al mundo de la inteligencia artificial de la mano de Graham Mackintosh, especialista de la NASA, donde descubriremos cómo la IA está revolucionando nuestra forma de conquistar el cosmos, generando un sinfín de posibilidades para las próximas generaciones de la humanidad. Soy Sebastián Méndez, representante de la Sociedad de Alumnos de Mecatrónica e integrante del equipo estudiantil Astra Rocketry. Gracias por acompañarnos. En la Ibero nos destacamos por nuestra completa adaptación a la era digital, de la sociedad de la información, transformándonos en una plataforma colaborativa, destinada a concebir soluciones innovadoras para los retos contemporáneos. Nos esforzamos por fomentar un ambiente de creatividad y equilibrio entre la generación de conocimiento y la colaboración social, con el compromiso de nutrir líderes vanguardistas capacitados para navegar y modelar el futuro. Antes de comenzar con nuestro programa, agradecemos la colaboración de la Agencia Espacial Mexicana, al igual que el apoyo de nuestros patrocinadores, GEMED, CDO y Valencia del Toro, cuyos representantes hoy nos acompañan. A continuación, tengo el gusto de presentarles a las honorables autoridades que nos acompañan en esta ceremonia. Licenciado Guillermo Castro, subdirector de la Agencia Espacial Mexicana. Doctora Dominique Brown, directora del Departamento de Física y Matemáticas. Maestra Erika Enríquez Montaut, directora de Educación Continua. Graham Mackintosh, consultor especializado en la aplicación de aprendizaje profundo a las disciplinas de Ciencia Espacial e Inteligencia Artificial. Doctor Alejandro Anaya, vicerrector académico de la Universidad Iberoamericana, Ciudad de México. A continuación, el doctor Alejandro Anaya, vicerrector de la Ibero, nos dirigirá unas palabras de bienvenida.
Muchas gracias, muy buenos días. Es muy emocionante estar aquí en este auditorio lleno de nuestro estudiantado, de nuestros visitantes. Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. Querida comunidad universitaria, distinguidas y distinguidos invitados, to our guests, we're very excited to have you here. Very grateful for your presence and your visit. Bueno, nos reunimos esta mañana con mucho entusiasmo para inaugurar esta conferencia magistral, la conferencia La NASA en la Ibero, episodio 1, suena así como de película, ¿no? De Star Wars. Entonces el episodio 1 es hoy, quiere decir que va a haber más. This means you will be coming back to Ibero several times. Inteligencia artificial, ¿no? Pues estoy muy emocionado como vicerrector de esta universidad y es un honor darles la más cordial bienvenida, porque este evento no solo representa un hito para nuestra institución, sino que también nos acerca al futuro de la ciencia, al futuro de la tecnología en nuestro país, ante las posibilidades que se abren al utilizar de una manera responsable y humanista la inteligencia artificial. La presencia de la NASA en nuestro campus se debe a un encuentro estratégico entre la universidad y la vanguardia de la exploración espacial. Agradecemos, por supuesto, a Graham Mackintosh su presencia y de manera particular a la Agencia Espacial Mexicana muchas gracias, Guillermo, por hacer esto una realidad y pues por acercarnos, ¿no?, a esta experiencia que nos va a dar una introducción a ese vasto y fascinante universo de la inteligencia artificial y su aplicación en el espacio. So, dear Graham, welcome to our university. We're pleased to have you here and extremely excited to hear what you will have to share with us this morning, and then afterwards in other venues, regarding this fascinating area of artificial intelligence in space exploration, research, and so on. Thank you so much for being here, and also to our other visitors y a nuestros patrocinadores también, los patrocinadores de este evento. Muchísimas gracias, y muchísimas gracias a la Dirección de Educación Continua por hacer también esto una posibilidad. So thank you so much to all of you for being here. Now, if you don't mind, I will switch back to Spanish to continue my brief introductory remarks. Bueno, el año pasado, recordarán muchos de ustedes, con el motivo del 80 aniversario de nuestra universidad, organizamos un evento importante sobre la inteligencia artificial y sus aplicaciones en la robótica, en vehículos autónomos, en la arquitectura, en el diseño, en temas de derecho y propiedad intelectual, entre otros campos. Y en ese sentido, pues hemos sido testigos de la creciente incursión de la inteligencia artificial en muchas áreas, sobre todo en aquellas áreas en que se requiere procesar grandes cantidades de datos. Estoy seguro que las palabras o la conferencia del doctor Mackintosh pues nos darán mucha riqueza y mucha información y muchas ideas al respecto de cómo la inteligencia artificial está ayudando a resolver problemas de la industria aeroespacial. Nos interesa especialmente conocer estas aplicaciones de la inteligencia artificial, dado que sabemos que la ciencia y la tecnología aplicada en las misiones espaciales están en la frontera del conocimiento. Lo platicábamos antes de empezar este evento, cómo la investigación que se da en el espacio después llega a nuestra vida cotidiana. Además de que muchas de estas soluciones de tecnología que nacen en el área aeroespacial, eventualmente, como decía, se trasladan a la sociedad, al uso cotidiano en servicios como el transporte, la energía, el uso de la tecnología en la salud, etc. Reconocemos que la inteligencia artificial, además de ser una herramienta tecnológica, es una fuerza transformadora que influye en la vida cotidiana de las personas y en la sociedad en su conjunto. En este sentido, es imperativo que su desarrollo, su aplicación, estén arraigadas en principios éticos sólidos, como los que guían el quehacer de la IBERO. En la Universidad Iberoamericana tenemos un compromiso firme con la formación de nuestro estudiantado en el uso de habilidades técnicas, la aplicación de la ciencia, la tecnología, pero con un énfasis muy claro en esa conciencia ética que guíe nuestra contribución al desarrollo de nuestro país. Recientemente también la IBERO publicó sus lineamientos para el uso de la inteligencia artificial en las aulas y en general en los procesos de enseñanza-aprendizaje. La postura institucional en este sentido, expresada en esos lineamientos, no va hacia prohibir su uso, no va orientada a prohibir el uso de softwares, chats, aplicaciones de Internet o en general sistemas de inteligencia artificial generativa, sino más bien a promover su uso en las clases con toda libertad, pero por supuesto con toda responsabilidad por parte de profesorado y estudiantes. Estamos conscientes de las capacidades que la inteligencia artificial les darán a ustedes, las habilidades y las herramientas que les darán después en su desarrollo profesional para tener más creatividad, más productividad, más eficiencia, etc. Sin embargo, también hemos de ser críticos y cautelosos con los riesgos que surgen con el uso indebido de este tipo de herramientas. La ética y el desarrollo humano, entonces, deben ir de la mano del desarrollo de la inteligencia artificial. O al revés, el desarrollo de la inteligencia artificial tiene que ir de la mano de la ética y del tener a la persona humana en el centro. Es nuestra responsabilidad como institución académica inculcar, transmitir a nuestro estudiantado la comprensión o la idea, el principio de que la tecnología debe de servir al bien común y al progreso social. La inteligencia artificial debe ser eficiente y su uso ético, respetando los valores fundamentales que sustentan a nuestra sociedad y que impulsamos desde la IBERO. Dentro de este tema ético se encuentra lo relacionado con el derecho a los datos como parte integral de una agenda de derechos humanos. Y en este sentido, intelectuales como David Carroll han destacado la importancia de ese derecho, el derecho a la privacidad y al control sobre los datos sobre nuestra persona, señalándolo como el control que tenemos sobre nuestros propios datos, un control que implica entonces un derecho fundamental para proteger nuestra privacidad y nuestra autonomía en nuestros propios procesos de toma de decisiones. Este derecho, el derecho a los datos, a la privacidad, etcétera, considera que la persona los disponga, controle y proporcione de manera libre e informada, y que la persona conozca quién los posee, quién los almacena y para qué los usa. Y en dado caso de querer oponerse a ellos, pues que se oponga a ese control o a ese manejo de su propia información, de sus propios datos. En línea con la inspiración ignaciana que rige a la IBERO, en la que se valora la dignidad y el respeto por la persona, abogamos entonces por motivarles para que ejerzan su derecho a sus propios datos y proteger la integridad de su persona y la libertad y la autonomía en sus decisiones. Es crucial, entonces, pues participar en un proceso de formación con nuestra comunidad universitaria sobre cómo evitar pues, las posibles manipulaciones de los datos de parte de la inteligencia artificial. Y en ese sentido, en la IBERO promovemos la conciencia sobre la importancia de comprender cómo se utilizan y cómo se usan los datos personales en el contexto de las distintas sistemas, herramientas de inteligencia artificial. Mediante programas de formación y de concientización, pues mostramos o ponemos sobre la mesa a nuestro estudiantado, a la sociedad en general, esa importancia de ejercer la capacidad de criterio y reflexión sobre el uso de la tecnología, fortaleciendo así nuestra capacidad para tomar nuestras decisiones y que sean decisiones informadas. La inclusión es otro pilar fundamental en la construcción de la inteligencia artificial del futuro. La diversidad de personas con sus variadas perspectivas y experiencias es esencial para garantizar que la inteligencia artificial pues, promueva, sea copartícipe de la generación de una sociedad más justa y más equitativa, es decir, que no genere, que no produzca mayores desigualdades. Y eso es muy importante para la IBERO. En fin, pues ya no quiero seguir tomando más tiempo de lo verdaderamente importante, que es escuchar a nuestro invitado. Así que, sin mayores preámbulos, pues reitero la bienvenida, reitero el agradecimiento y pues les invito a aprovechar que tenemos a Graham Mackintosh con nosotros. Please welcome and le damos las gracias otra vez. Muy bien.
Muchas gracias al doctor Alejandro por sus palabras y participación en la ceremonia. El doctor Alejandro Anaya debe atender en este momento otros compromisos universitarios. Despidámoslo con un fuerte aplauso. Ahora invitamos al doctor Eduardo Gamaliel Hernández, director de la División de Ciencia, Arte y Tecnología, a que pueda subir al escenario y tomar su lugar como representante de la Academia Institucional. Bienvenido. La NASA y la IBERO hoy se unen para buscar un equilibrio entre la formación, la generación de conocimiento y la vinculación. Los invito a ver el siguiente video.
Technology has revolutionized the world more in the last 20 years than in the previous 20 centuries. If the Internet transformed our planet, artificial intelligence will further enhance this transformation in the coming years. Our university, founded by the Society of Jesus with 80 years of history, is today fully integrated into the information society. being a space for the co-creation of responses to the great challenges of our time. IBERO, a generative university, seeks a balance between education, knowledge generation, and engagement, forming frontier leaders where artificial intelligence and the space sector also meet. This spirit of growth and continuous education is supported by the strength of our engineering programs and many other disciplines that technology transforms more every day. Today, we will explore the future with NASA expert Graham Mackintosh. Graham Mackintosh is an AI consultant specializing in the application of deep learning to space science disciplines. Before his current position at NASA, Graham worked in IBM's Emerging Technology Division and led successful AI initiatives at CERN, the SETI Institute, and with the US federal government. In this session, we will review the basics of AI and its potential impact on the human condition as we move forward to explore and understand the universe around us. Recent innovations in artificial intelligence are demonstrating exciting capabilities that could help support the human exploration and habitation of destinations in deep space beyond low Earth orbit. We will examine why these capabilities are important for human space exploration and, in particular, how AI can enhance our ability to maintain astronaut health when living and working in the extreme environment of space.
A continuación, y antes de pasar a nuestra conferencia magistral, el licenciado Guillermo Castro, subdirector de la Agencia Espacial Mexicana, nos dirigirá un mensaje. Adelante.
Muchas gracias. Muy buenos días. Agradezco a las autoridades presentes por estar aquí, al señor vicerrector, su digno representante, doctor Gamaliel, maestra Erika, gracias por hacer esto posible. Doctora Dominique, merci beaucoup. Y también es muy importante agradecer a las personalidades presentes, nuestros sponsors. Si escuchan su nombre, por favor, si pueden ponerse de pie. Brent Abbott, please stand up. Y si pueden poner simultáneamente de pie Juan Carlos Macías, Enrique Aguilar, Raúl Valencia del Toro, Carla Mousenit, embajadora Enrique Berruga. Por favor. Reconocemos y agradecemos su presencia y su generosidad como sponsors, al igual que del exalcalde que por compromisos previos no pudo estar aquí presente, Roberto Telles, y el cónsul Brad Donovan. También sí, un abrazo y un agradecimiento muy grande para ellos. Y bueno, yo voy a continuar, venía preparado en el inglés y en español, pero para estar en simetría con el señor vicerrector, vamos a dar esta parte en español. Hoy es un día histórico y recuerden bien estas palabras porque al final todos vamos a estar de acuerdo porque lo fue. Hoy emprenderemos un viaje con Graham Mackintosh con esta conferencia, la NASA en la IBERO. La inteligencia artificial es un tema que provoca fascinación o miedo. Y es que toda innovación disruptiva son cisnes negros que rompen paradigmas y causan ese efecto. Por ejemplo, en la Revolución Industrial recordamos el ludismo, un movimiento encabezado por artesanos ingleses en el siglo XIX que protestaron entre los años 1811 y 1816 contra las nuevas máquinas como telares industriales y máquinas de hilar, que amenazaban con reemplazar a los artesanos con trabajadores menos calificados y que cobraban salarios más bajos, dejándolos sin trabajo. 1811. ¿Les suena? ¿Lo han escuchado con la inteligencia artificial? Tenemos que aprender de la historia. Entonces, eso no pasó. That never happened. El mundo solo se transformó y evolucionó. Los inventores de aquellas máquinas transformaron las luces de su pensamiento en máquinas que de hecho contribuyeron a democratizar y masificar los bienes que antes estaban en manos solo de unos pocos. Los que estamos ya después del 5º piso, recuerden la telefonía celular, que era para muy pocos y muy cara, y hoy todos tenemos, ¿es verdad? El descubrimiento de la energía nuclear también fue un cisne negro, fue una disrupción, de la cual su manifestación más estridente fue la explosión de Hiroshima y Nagasaki, con la que terminó la Segunda Guerra Mundial. Pero también es cierto que hoy tenemos medicina nuclear, la que en manos expertas y capaces es capaz de salvar la vida de esa persona que tú y yo más queremos. Y lo que sin ser tan estridente sí es trascendental en nuestra historia personal, pues si esa medicina nuclear salva la vida de la persona que más amamos, es trascendente y es importante y está en concordancia con el alma del espíritu de lo que mencionó antes el señor vicerrector. Pero ese salvamento de la vida de la persona que más amamos no va a salir en las noticias de mañana. En esta era digital y de información de hoy, pues la historia se construye cada día en los medios de comunicación, pero muchos sabios también dicen que los días felices son páginas blancas en la historia. Así, octavas de resonancia de aquellos tiempos oscuros resuenan hoy, tal vez no sin justificación. Elon Musk, a quien tuvimos el gusto de traer a México a conferencia, así como esta en el JAC en 2016, ha prevenido los riesgos de la inteligencia artificial. Jan Polsky, ex colaborador de Elon Musk, de la Universidad de Louisville, ha ido más allá y ha llamado la atención a dos indicadores claves que no debemos perder de vista: la velocidad y la dirección de la inteligencia artificial, concluyendo que para él de eso depende que la inteligencia artificial se convierta en la prosperidad o en la extinción de la humanidad. Qué importante. Pero tenemos ya dos indicadores con los cuales trabajar. Para eso tenemos pues a los representantes de los departamentos de las universidades, que son la luz de este país. Y como vemos entonces, con diferencia de grado, pero no de sustancia, lo mismo se dijo de la energía nuclear, de las máquinas de la revolución industrial, pero también de cualquier tecnología nueva, como en su día lo fueron el arco y la flecha, incluso en su momento también lo fue el fuego. Y esa es la palabra clave, el fuego, simbolizando la luz del Prometeo, presente en las mentes de todos nosotros, los seres sintientes y pensantes. Y por eso estamos en una universidad, por eso estamos en esta universidad iberoamericana, aprendiendo y aumentando nuestras luces, en este caso acerca de la inteligencia artificial. Concluimos que a lo largo de toda la historia, toda tecnología nueva ha causado fascinación o miedo, por igual, pero esa dialéctica siempre se ha resuelto en la conclusión: it's in the way that you use it. Depende cómo lo uses, cómo la programes, cómo la controles. Y por eso, pues, precisamente estamos hoy reunidos. El episodio 1 de la NASA en la IBERO el día de hoy, esta vez hablando acerca de la inteligencia artificial, nos hará conscientes de lo que siempre tenemos que estar conscientes, que en todas las cosas, no solo en las nuevas tecnologías, siempre está presente esa eterna batalla de la luz contra la oscuridad, el bien contra el mal, el buen uso y el mal uso. Y la lucha del conocimiento contra la ignorancia, que es misión de la IBERO, es lo trascendente. El conocimiento contra la ignorancia es lo trascendente. La conferencia de hoy será un motivo, un recordatorio, un despertador de que lo mejor que podemos hacer por nuestro mundo pues es aumentar nuestras luces. Una persona sin luces es como una bestia y no podemos dejar el manejo de la humanidad en manos de las bestias. ¿Estamos de acuerdo? Y yo estoy seguro que todas y todos ustedes han acudido al llamado de la IBERO el día de hoy porque quieren aumentar sus luces. Es lo que ha unido nuestras mentes y corazones el día de hoy aquí, ¿cierto? En mi caso, bueno, yo soy funcionario federal, director segundo al organigrama de la Agencia Espacial Mexicana, de la cual pues, orgullosamente soy pionero. Nos tocó construirla from scratch. Y es todo un estudio de caso muy interesante que si un día me invitan a platicar su historia aquí en la IBERO, pues con todo gusto vengo a platicárselas. Es un buen estudio de caso. Y paralelamente, bueno, pues también soy profesor en política pública, comunicación gubernamental y manejo de crisis gubernamental en el ITAM y en otras universidades, speaker también. No doy clase a licenciatura, mis alumnos ya son directivos, ejecutivos, gerentes de grandes empresas de academia, industria y gobierno. Y Tengo la fortuna de haber sido reconocido pues, con 100% en esas clases. Pero ¿y qué me mueve para todo eso? Lo mismo que ustedes, aumentar mis luces. Y queremos salvar al mundo tal vez, y eso los mueve. Eso se va a dar por añadidura si todos nosotros aumentamos nuestras luces y entendimiento. ¿Cómo es eso? La misión de una universidad es eso, aumentar nuestras luces y conocimientos. Conozco y he dado conferencias en muchas universidades, pero la IBERO se distingue por un factor X. Es especial la IBERO, tal vez es la mística que la impregna. Y la IBERO está llena de grandes faros de luz, por ejemplo, José Miguel Petisco, el jesuita español que murió en 1800 y que fue uno de los primeros en traducir la Biblia entera al castellano, sirviendo de base para la Biblia Torres Amat, y que hoy nos posibilita para extraer en español frases de luz como sobre todo busquen el reino de Dios y su justicia, y todo lo demás se dará por añadidura. Sabiduría que está en San Mateo 6, 24, 34. Por extensión a lo académico, busquemos las luces entonces del conocimiento y todo se dará por añadidura. Yo creo que la ignorancia de lo trascendente, ese sí es el verdadero infierno. Programemos y controlemos con sabiduría a la inteligencia artificial y esta innovación servirá como palanca de desarrollo y progreso para la humanidad, como lo ha sido con todas las anteriores innovaciones tecnológicas del pasado. Ese es el camino. Y la Universidad Iberoamericana está marcando el camino. Además de organizar conferencias como esta, ha impulsado un gran proyecto como no se había visto en este país, con su centro de innovación, basándose en 3 ejes: investigación, docencia, vinculación. La vinculación promueve alianzas para impulsar la profundidad del conocimiento y con la educación continua nos demuestra la importancia de seguir aprendiendo y estudiando cada día, para así aumentar nuestras luces y conocimientos. Y eso es lo trascendente en la existencia, aumentar nuestras luces y aplicarlas. El día de hoy, pues, sí, es un día histórico que con la NASA contribuye con una acción más a la internacionalización e interculturalidad de la IBERO, que el año pasado, como ya se mencionó, cumplió sus primeros 80 años, siendo una universidad que se distingue por su alto nivel académico, la generación de conocimiento e investigación y por su compromiso e incidencia social, vinculada con el mundo y los problemas que le aquejan. Esta vinculación y educación continua con la NASA, Linkage with NASA, también ofrece la posibilidad de impulsar con proyectos de alto valor agregado este centro de innovación mencionado. Y cabe recordar, como ya mencionó el señor vicerrector, la tecnología espacial es la cuna de donde han salido las mayores innovaciones de la humanidad. El subproducto ya más notorio, lo tienen siempre cerca de ustedes o junto a ustedes, es su smartphone. Y a ese también ya entró a jugar la inteligencia artificial. La conferencia de hoy, la NASA en la IBERO, pues es una de las acciones que se alinean plenamente con 5 ejes estratégicos: excelencia humana integral, incidencia social, internacionalización, interculturalidad, fortalecimiento de la identidad ignaciana y eficiencia y sostenibilidad. Concluyo diciendo: ¿qué directrices debe seguir una política pública para regular la inteligencia artificial? ¿Qué dilemas bioéticos nos presenta esa y otras innovaciones tecnológicas de hoy? Para los hijos de los chicos que hoy tienen 19 años, el nacer con la reproducción asistida por ADN, clonación o in vitro, crecer con alimentación por transgénicos, reproducirse, clonación, y morir, criogenización, no será tan simple como para nosotros, pues toda esta tecnología les ofrecerá a ellos todo un leviatán muy complejo de dilemas jurídico, éticos, bioéticos, legislativos, sucesorios, penales, etcétera, que requerirán de nuevos enfoques paradigmáticos, integrales y holísticos, más eficaces para resolverles sus complejos problemas cotidianos. Estoy convencido que para resolver todos esos dilemas bioéticos, éticos, legales, política pública, ingeniería, ciencia, pues ahí estará la Universidad Iberoamericana. y con sus grandes maestros, como por ejemplo Miguel Villoro Toranzo, que fue una luz que a mí me influyó mucho desde el ámbito del derecho y era justo profesor aquí de la IBERO, y a mí me marcó para siempre ese bendito jesuita. Así que gracias a la IBERO por aumentar nuestras luces, porque eso es lo que va a hacer la diferencia en la vida de cada uno de nosotros. Y por eso, sin duda, hoy con la NASA es un día histórico. Muchas gracias por eso.
Dar inicio a nuestra conferencia magistral. La NASA en la IBERO, episodio 1, Inteligencia Artificial. Me gustaría recordarles que la dinámica de preguntas y respuestas será de manera digital. Deberán enviar sus preguntas al código que aparece en pantalla para que nuestro panel dé lectura y pueda responder más adelante. El staff podrá ayudarles en todo momento. Le pido al Presidium que pueda bajar al tomar los asientos en la parte de abajo antes de continuar. Es un gusto darle la bienvenida a Graham Mackintosh, quien es tecnólogo y pionero de la innovación en inteligencia artificial con 25 años de experiencia, promoviendo nuevas soluciones operativas basadas en la investigación combinado con el desarrollo empresarial. Apasionado por el uso de la IA, el aprendizaje automático y el análisis de los grandes datos para avanzar en la ciencia espacial, optimizar negocios y mejorar la sociedad. Graham se ha desarrollado como consultor de IA en el Centro de Investigación AMES de la NASA, en la División de Supercomputadoras Avanzadas, asesor de IA y miembro del Comité de Dirección en el Laboratorio de Desarrollo Fronterizo de la NASA. Dentro de IBM como ejecutivo de proyecto para el Grupo de Tecnología Emergente, para el programa Watson Social Media Analytics, además de fungir como vicepresidente de Estrategia Corporativa para Cognos Incorporated. Entre su especialización se encuentra la conceptualización e innovación de aplicaciones de software, con énfasis en tecnología disruptiva y nuevos modelos de negocio. Le damos la bienvenida a Graham Mackintosh.
Thank you so much, first of all, for allowing me to speak in English as I give this presentation instead of your beautiful language here in Mexico. Also, of course, I want to thank the Mexican Space Agency, GAMO at AEM, for helping to coordinate this, Erika, her colleagues, and IBERO's leadership for arranging for me to come here. Now, you think you've come to see me, it's the other way around. I've come to see you. I'll explain why in a moment. If we could switch the display to my laptop. Very good. We've been hearing introductions. It makes it sound like I'm, the star of the show, and I'm not. I'm here to tell you that the star of the show is you. I'm old. I have gray hair. You don't. Do you know what we call you at NASA? You young faces with all the bright energy. You're the Mars generation. You're the ones that are going to take us there. So I may tell you some ideas that I have about artificial intelligence, and I hope you find it interesting. But my job is to encourage you to think beyond those ideas and to do them. Now, I know this will happen. And the reason is because we are all explorers. NASA is in the business of exploring, to going places we've never been before, but we explore intellectually, scientifically, socially. All of these different ways of expanding our horizons come together. That's how it works. So you are all part of this. And I believe artificial intelligence is a big part of how we will be explorers together and be successful. here's how I'd like to discuss it with you. First, I want to talk about why I think AI is important, the imperative of AI. That's new. I didn't know I had to connect to the box, whatever that is. Yes, exit. Okay. And then I want to talk in general about AI and space exploration. And then I'll talk to you about some of the projects that I am particularly involved in or leading. And then we, of course, have some discussion. So to get into why AI is imperative, why it's important, it almost implies, well, because it's all going to be amazing, right? It's going to be wonderful. It's all good. In English, we have an expression when something important is being ignored and it makes it very difficult to engage. It's called having an elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is the thing that everyone knows is there, it's a problem, and no one wants to talk about it, so it makes it hard to embrace some of the opportunities. And those problems are very real. I want to talk to you just for a moment about something that I'm sure you think about, you read about it. AI is scary. It's scary. It's making changes in society that are difficult. So the elephant in the room is not just about AI, to be fair. AI is a technology. So technologies amplify who we are and what we do, good and bad. Let's take the incredible improvements in aircraft. I mean, aircraft can be used to drop food for people who are starving. It can be used to drop fire retardant, to put out fires that are destroying homes. But they can also drop things that destroy homes. They are technology amplifies who we are. Rockets are technologies. And I love to hear about what the AEM is doing with Meridia. They're going to develop a brand new space center in Mexico. Think of it like your innovation hub, but for space. And rockets like these take satellites which allow research like this that happens right here, just a few years ago. I've read these papers. They're fantastic. Fantastic innovation on image processing. This particular group of individuals used a technology we'll talk about later called support vector machines, but that's not the point. The point is that was enabled by the rockets. But rockets can do evil as well. So that's, in a nutshell, the elephant in the room. Now, technologies fail us when they stop working. They do their job, but in ways that we didn't expect. They have unintended consequences. They also cause pain if they accelerate and improve faster than we as a society can adapt. And, of course, they don't help human condition if they're used intentionally for evil. And AI can be used that way, right? I mean, this is an individual, a mother, testifying to Congress how a deep fake voice of her daughter tricked her into believing that her daughter had been kidnapped. Even here in Mexico recently, right? You have Ms. Shobam having a video put out declaring everyone should invest in a financial fraud scheme. Of course, she didn't do that. It was all deep fake. So misinformation is just one example of AI being used in a way that is intentionally harmful. Now, I said this is true of any technology, but I will admit that AI is complex. Part of the elephant in the room with AI is because it's hard to constrain what it does without limiting the creativity that can come from AI. and we need that to solve difficult problems. It changes. You know, when you build a plane, it stays a plane. It doesn't change. But when you build an AI model, it learns and self-adapts and becomes something different than what we made. That's exciting, but it's difficult. Its capabilities are incredibly improving fast, and what happens to jobs? How do we retrain? How do we become partners with AI instead of under it? And so on. Very difficult to regulate. It's easy to get at this technology. It's very generalizable. And in a way that is difficult to put our heads around, here we are trying to make something that it will become better at us at the very thing that makes us the dominant species on this planet. That's unusual. So, interesting to think about. My approach to the elephant in the room is to say, let's just focus on the good things and have that just outweigh the other things. And space exploration is a unifying, uplifting thing for humanity. It always has been. So I feel good about using AI to drive innovations that will help us solve some of the important problems for humanity: healthcare, education, applying AI to making you better educated than ever. Applying it to existential threats, climate change, and so on. But I like to apply it to our quest to understand the universe around us. So with that, let's take an example and understand what's AI. What is AI? Just for some of you may know it well, some may not. So AI is a very broad definition. It covers all kinds of things. In general, it aims to mimic and emulate biological intelligence. And often, once we see a computer do it, we go, oh, that's not intelligence. And we move the goalpost. But that's okay. It covers any technique that lets it mimic human intelligence. Machine learning is statistically driven typically. I happen to be most involved in deep learning, where you have a mathematical representation of neural connectivity. And it aims to use artificial neurons that are connected in a way that can take an input and produce an output that is valuable in some way. In this case, just recognize a written number. So literally the little bits and pixels that make up the number 2, they go in. Each neuron is connected to another layer with different weights, and eventually the neuron that gets the most energy out of the network is the answer, 2. The way it's trained is to show it lots and lots of examples and do something called backpropagation. So when it gets it wrong, you find the neuron that was most responsible for the wrong answer and you punish it by changing the biases and the weights. And you do this over and over, because when you change something to make it work better for the number 4, that might make it worse for the number 9. And you have to tweak it and change it. You have to do this millions of times. And the mathematics for this are very hard. That's why the computers doing this are so big. So think of it this way. This is a representation of a very simple perceptron neural net. To give you a sense of scale, this is basic neural net architecture. To make it understandable to our eyes, 2% of the connections, those lines, are actually shown. Otherwise, it would just be a big white box. It's huge. And this is simple. This is just to do number recognition. So it's an interesting field, and let's go through an example. And I'll show how it applies to everyday life, but also space exploration. So this is called an autocorrelator. What it does is take lots of neurons, crunch it down into just a few, and then go back out again. It has one job, to try and produce at the end what went in. So it wants to decode and create that exact same image. And to begin with, it does a terrible job. It doesn't know anything. But each time you say, no, 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 you're trying to make that, it gets a little better, and gradually it does a pretty good job. Now, for the mathematicians in the room, we train that with something called a loss function. That's just the expression there is just a fancy way of saying the difference between what went in and what came out. That's how we train the neural net. So imagine how useful this is, because once it's trained, the difference between those two becomes also a useful score. It says, this is different than what I've seen. This is an anomaly. If you train it over and over to do a good job with the number 6, and then you show it something completely different, it's going to do a terrible job of that. It hasn't seen that before, so the whole neural network is not set up to do it. So the anomaly score, that's a terrible 6. It's not a 6. That's an anomaly. So that's the beauty of autocorrelators. It's unsupervised learning. And you do this all the time. When you buy a new car, at first you're like, oh, does that sound normal? I'm not used to this car. And gradually you get used to what your car sounds like. And you're happy. The car's working perfectly. And you become very sensitive to a strange noise. You go, that doesn't sound like my car. That's because you're like the autocorrelator. You're like, oh, that sounds normal. No one told you that. You just learned it all by yourself. So we do this. Your brains are set up this way. We know this because we run psychological experiments on chess masters. So we'll show them a real game layout. And the better the chess player, the better they are at just seeing the game briefly and reproducing it. They see it for 5 seconds, and they'll put every piece on the board perfectly. That's because they've compressed down a way to think about the chess game. Novices don't do a good job. But here's the interesting thing. If you show an expert chess master a random game with pieces in places that would never normally happen in a game of chess, they are no better than the novice. That's because their anomaly detection hasn't worked. The chessboard went into their eyes, but couldn't come back out their fingers. It's the same thing. So think how useful that would be in other scenarios, like once you've trained a neural net over and over with different numbers. Let me just keep going through this. Once that's trained, the dimensional reduction forces the model to learn feature chunks. And we're using this in a project at NASA Ames Research Center to analyze the electrical power right in the buildings that we use. So we track that data. It gives us all sorts of information about how the electrical power is used within buildings. So think of it this way. We can now use an autocorrelator to kind of just notice when something funny happens. Just like a number 3 would go in, not very well written, and the 3 that comes out isn't exactly the same. You might go, oh, that's not a good 3. Well, the same thing can happen with power. In goes the power, out comes the autocorrelator's reproduction of that, and you'd say, well, wait, that doesn't look like what came in. Over there, it's different. That's an anomaly. So in space, maybe there's a system watching all of the power systems within the spacecraft. And it doesn't have the answers. It just wants to say to the astronaut, that doesn't look like something I've seen before. That's like you listening to your car. Right? Okay, so that was a general introduction to AI. I'm going to move a little faster now because now you're all AI experts. So think of it this way. Why do we need AI? Well, you know what? Antarctica is a difficult place to go. It's dangerous. It's cold. And when we explored it, initially the people died. It's hard to go there. Nowadays, it's very different, of course. You don't go to Antarctica to be brave and explore. You go to Antarctica to do amazing science and other things. Well, the moon is also a difficult place. And I'm here to say that Apollo lunar lander is the lunar equivalent of that little tent, right at the edge of what is technically possible, right at the edge of what is survivable. And space is dangerous. But we need to get to there, just like Antarctica. You're the ones who are going to get us there. And you're going to need AI to help. So human exploration, duration, environment, and the distance from help really defines how hard it is. All through history, we have explorers who have weathered danger, whether it's real or imagined, and accomplished wonderful things. And this is really where, for half a century since the Apollo missions to the moon, this is what the astronauts' view in space has been. We're in low Earth orbit. It's not that far. The distance to the space station is about like going to Puerto Vallarta. Same distance. 400 kilometers, that kind of thing. Not that far. So in low Earth orbit, if there's a medical emergency, for example, you can be on the ground with a doctor in 3.5 hours. That's how fast they can do it. If you're going to Mars, the view out the window is very different. Earth is a tiny little dot. Imagine what that does to your brain, to your psychology, to your sense of loneliness. What does that do? No evacuation, no rescue. You're on your own. And we need AI to help make them safe. You can't even communicate. It's 25 minutes for light, for radio signals to go there and back. So no conversation. So it's a very difficult problem. Duration, these are permanent habitats or planetary class missions. Environment, you're in low or zero gravity, that does things to your body. Radiation and so on. It's a challenging environment. So just think of one example. For astronaut health, ultrasound is the preferred mechanism for doing imaging in space. And in the space station, the crew member there who might be examining another crew member who's not feeling well, he doesn't have to be a perfect ultrasound sonographer. He just has to put it in the right place generally, because the European Space Agency has a probe which can be manipulated using by a doctor on the ground. Right? It twists around and gets it just right. Well, Mars is different. You're 25 minutes away. You can't control it from the ground. That's not going to work. So that's why we have solutions that are emerging, like companies like Caption Health, which have AI built into the ultrasound, so that it's looking at its own signal and telling the user, here's what you need to do. Rotate clockwise slowly. Move it this way, 5 centimeters. Because it knows you're trying to capture a good image, let's say, of a heart valve or something like that. Amazing stuff. So to jump into projects that I'm working on, and they all focus on space exploration, the first I want to talk to you about is a technique called deep reinforcement learning. And think of it like, in English, we call it trial and error. You try, it's wrong, you try again, you just do that over and over and over. But in the case of a computer, it does it millions of times. That's one of the key technologies that DeepMind used to create the world's best Go player, AlphaGo. So Go is, by most accounts, the most complex game ever devised by humankind. It makes chess look like a simple game in comparison. And the computer beat the best player in the world from Korea. And you know what's interesting? In an interview that he gave afterwards, he explained that he found it very unsettling. He didn't like being beaten, but that's not what bothered him. Go is so complex that as you're playing it, you can kind of sense the personality of the person you're playing. It's a psychology game as well. And it unsettled him to sense a deep personality in the AI system that he was playing. So, trial and error. It's an interesting technique. It allows you to move from the concept of just tactical steps, what should I do next, what should I do next, to strategy. When I lose, I go, oh, I made a mistake right at the beginning. I'm going to change my strategy next time. This is very powerful. So, for example, NASA looks at deep reinforcement learning to show how robots can adapt if something goes wrong, just like animals would. So a fun example here, they had a robot model, so this is in a computer, saying, look, I'm gonna tell you that this leg here no longer works. You can't walk like you used to. Learn through trial and error, just by trying, how to walk without that foot. And it's kind of interesting. It sort of gradually learned to sort of lope along and barely touch the ground with that foot. But then they did a mean thing. The mean scientist said, as a joke, well, now you're not allowed to touch the ground with any of your feet. Try that. And they thought that was funny, and they went home and came back the next morning, and the robot was very proud. It said, I've figured it out. I know how to do it. And they asked to see how, and so the robot showed them. Now, it's funny, right? Because it's like a kid. It's like, I don't know what is going to work or what the rules are. I'm just going to keep doing what I did before. So, I'll just learn as I go. That's what I mean by AI sometimes having unintended consequences. In that case, it's fun, but we wouldn't want a system like this to flip upside down and crush all the instrumentation. That said, you can see the value. Imagine that one of those didn't work and it had to learn to continue the mission no matter what. So one project I'm involved in is trying to use deep reinforcement learning to get rid of orbital debris, which is dangerous, right? There's examples already of stuff we put into orbit impacting spacecraft. So we need to get rid of some of that. And this is well understood. If you look at some of the quotes here, this is essentially saying this is a big problem. We have to fix it. It's not just up to governments to fix it. I think we're going to need to have commercial companies help us. That's how big a problem we have here. So I agree. And I proposed this challenge to the public a few years ago to try and imagine an autonomous spacecraft which is powered by an ion thruster. So it's very light power, but it can go for a long time. So it only puts out about as much power as a coin in your hand. That's how much weight. But it goes and goes and goes, and can maybe visit not just one, but lots of different targets that all need slightly different orbits to intercept and remove. So it would fly by the object, eject a net, and then use electrodynamic dampening to deorbit it. So this was an interesting challenge. We used, as examples, real debris targets from a collision that occurred in 2009 between Iridium-33 and Cosmos 2251. So thousands of bits of shrapnel came from these collisions, and we want to get rid of them. So I put out a challenge to the public. I picked just 12 of the objects in the Iridium debris field. And a team based in University of Toronto used the Niagara supercomputer there to solve that problem. And they developed a new technique, a new function, the low thrust RQ law, and succeeded in deorbiting all of those objects with very little fuel. Now the question is, how do we now scale up from 12 to thousands of objects? For those of you who are mathematicians, you'll recognize the orbital debris problem as being it's an NP-hard problem. That's the class of problem. It's like the traveling salesperson, but on steroids, because all of the cities aren't sitting still, they're in orbit, they're moving. So our hypothesis is that deep reinforcement learning will allow us to approximate an optimal solution, good enough, without it being the combinatorial optimization is exponential in difficulty as you scale up. But with AI, we could keep it linear. So that's a good example. A second example is that I'm working on is in the area of astronaut health. And this deals with data that we collect on Earth before astronauts go on a mission, and also once they're in space. So one thing we're very keen to do is figure out how can we monitor the health of astronauts without sticking things on them and taking blood. And being an astronaut is difficult. They don't want to be poked and uncomfortable. How can we monitor their pulmonary health, the health of their lungs? Because we know there's certain things in space. If they go to the moon, we know the lunar dust, it's called regolith, is very toxic. In fact, Gene Cernan was the Apollo 17 astronaut. That picture there, it's dark not because there wasn't enough light. He's covered in moon dust, covered in it. It sticks to you. And it's not like sand on the beach. There's no water or wind to round the shape. This is like little bits of glass in your lungs. It's horrible. So important that we know how to do this. Now, we were inspired by beagles, by a dog, because we know they can sniff breath. They can sniff blood samples. They can sniff urine samples, and they can be trained to say, this, I'm going to bark when I smell someone who has, cancer. So we know the data is in the molecules that are coming off of the sample. We know the data is there. The dogs can be trained. So how can we make an electronic nose? That's what this is. So the eNose is developed where I work at NASA Ames Research in California. And Dr. Jing Li is the inventor. I'm the principal investigator on how to amplify its capabilities with AI. So they're very good at threshold detection, how many parts per million of this molecule. But what about patterns of molecules that indicate different diseases, biomarkers? So we want to develop an AI model that handles hundreds of different molecules in a pattern that we can use for diagnosis. And we're excited because this captures an important part of what we do at NASA. NASA is, their mandate from the government is to explore. But another mandate they have is to take what they develop and show how we can help humanity with it as well. And that's what this does. Imagine a device like this where you could go to a remote community and help to diagnose malaria more quickly. Or maybe embedded into a little air filter you might have in your bedroom. So when you wake up in the morning, it's Bluetooth connected to your phone, and it's like, you might want to set up an appointment with your doctor. Your breath was just a little off, and it's not that it smelled, no problem. The molecules in it were not what I would expect. You should go get it checked out. And in fact, when you go to the doctor, imagine it becomes one of the ways you're brought in. Just like, okay, sit down, we're going to weigh you, take your blood pressure, your temperature, and breathe into this tube. Great. 10 minutes later, the doctor will see you, and by that time, they already have scanned you for 25 different diseases. So we're excited with where this might go. Another area of astronaut health that I'm involved in gets into these limited data sets. Now, I say limited, it seems so strange, right? Medicine is usually tons of data. But you got to remember, there's billions of us. But there's only a few dozen astronauts. We don't have a lot of examples to draw from. How do we know what happened? And here's the thing. Biology on Earth is not the same as biology in space. You change when you're in space. So all that data doesn't always apply in space. We have to start again. So we're often dealing with limited data. And we know that you change in space because NASA took identical twins, sent one to space, and one stayed on Earth. And they made them do almost the same things, exercise, food, everything's the same. The only difference was one was weightless and in a space environment, and one wasn't. And a lot of things changed. Some of them not good. Your heart changes shape, your blood distribution, vascular system changes. So I was involved in a project with the Canadian Space Agency, who they developed this thing called the astroskin. So this is Canadian astronaut on the ISS, David Saint-Jacques. And it's wonderful because you don't stick anything on you, you just wear this vest, and the biosensors are kind of woven into the fabric, so it's very comfortable. And we wanted to use it to monitor the heart health of astronauts, ECGs. So normally when you have an ECG, a doctor looks at it, but we wanted a computer to watch it all the time, 24 hours a day. And so think of it this way. We wanted, remember the example I showed you where it could take a 2 and figure out, oh, that's the number 2? Do the exact same thing, but this time the input is an ECG, and it goes, oh, you've got atrial fibrillation. That's not good. It's just a different set of data. And so the problem we had was, where do we get data that shows an astronaut having a heart problem? We don't have that. Very few incidents. In fact, there's only really one. This is the only ECG I'm aware of showing an astronaut in orbit having a heart problem. And that was way back in 1970, I think. And it was just very brief. So that's our problem. How do we train the neural net when we have no examples to use? So what we did was we used generative AI. So generative adversarial networks, you've heard about generative AI. That's what's behind ChatGPT and things like that. It makes new stuff. That's its job, make new data. So you can, for example, and this is real, this is a real system, you may have seen it, show it lots of examples of famous paintings by certain artists. Then you can show it photographs and say, make a painting of that image, that photograph, as if it were the artist. And it does a pretty good job. It goes, okay, I understand sort of the style of the artist. So these work. And so what we said was, well, look, why don't we sort of do something like that? The style is the heartbeat of an astronaut in orbit wearing an astroskin. The photograph is someone on Earth having a heart problem. And the blend of those two is what an astronaut in space would look like if they're having a heart problem. So we did that. We created a neural network, and this is back in 2018, that did a generative AI model, quite complex architecture. And the output we were very encouraged with. Doctors looked at it and went, yeah, that looks about right. And in today's environment, that's kind of a gold standard. But also mathematically, we showed that the black dots are humans on Earth having a symptomatic ECG. They've got a problem. The red dots are astronauts wearing the astroskin with no heart problems. And the blue dots are what this system output, which is mathematically kind of in between the two. So we feel confident that we could generate lots of blue data and train the model using that and detect a heart problem of an astronaut in orbit successfully. So we got around the too little data problem by making more data ourselves with AI. Another opposite problem is when you have too much data. So the challenge of spaceborne data, biology data, let's say, from astronauts in space, is it's sometimes huge. There's not many astronauts, but we collect a lot of data from them. Here's the problem. All through history, this goes way back to like the telegraph, we have created data much, much faster than our ability to transmit it. So for the mathematicians in the room, this is a logarithmic scale. So just imagine the exponential curves. They're insane. We're generating data sets that are so huge compared to our ability to move the data around. That's why we often, to put it, one way it's phrased is you move the question to the data, not the data to the question. You move the computing power to the data. Leave the data where it is. Now, that problem of moving the data is why companies like Amazon offer this. They did the math, and they found out that you can move more data from one place to another faster, so that's more bytes per meter per second, by putting it in a truck, petabytes of data in a truck, and driving it at 100 kilometers an hour than you can over a fiber optic line. Like, that's the math. Because we're so much better at storing data than we are at transmitting it. Now, spaceborne data is going to be no different. We'll have the same issue. That means to me that pretty soon we will not be able to downlink to transmit back to Earth all the data we make. Now, is that a problem? Or is this something amazing? I think it's something amazing. I think it's something that is going to affect all of us soon, and you especially. I think of it as being a milestone when human knowledge will finally and forever span more than one celestial body. We won't bring it all back to Earth anymore. We've expanded as a species and become a spacefaring species. Our knowledge now goes to the moon and Mars. It's wonderful. It's amazing stuff. Now, a project that I'm the principal investigator on, and actually, coincidentally, today we're running an important test with the Earth replica of the systems we're about to use in space, is a project called Fluid. And it's run with several partners we have along the top. Federated learning is a technique where you leave the data where it is. You don't move it around for the reasons I mentioned. It's going to be huge. But you can still train neural nets as if you had brought all the data back down to Earth. You don't do that, but it looks like you did. So that's federated learning uses a technique to move little bits of the model up to where the data is, and train data models in the NASA Human Research Project labs or in our gene lab. And then you consolidate it again to a brand new model. That one looks it's as good as if you had brought all the data together. You move little bits of the data around, little bits of the model, not the data. So it adds complexity, but it works. So we're excited about this. This is a way of leaving data in space and combining it with data on the ground and moving AI forward. So why would we do this? What sort of benefit would it have? Why does this matter? I think it matters. Sorry, I'm just trying to. That's the computer we're going to be running it on in space. That'll happen in about 2 weeks. And in space, transmission of data is even harder than here on Earth. So this is important. Now it matters because of this. Here's one project we think will follow. If Fluid is successful, we want to start applying it to real problems that matter to NASA. If you look carefully, something interesting here, almost half of NASA's astronaut corps are female, which is fantastic. In fact, did you know the next mission to land on the moon, Artemis 3, is going to have the first woman to step foot on the moon, which is magnificent. Now, historically, the astronaut corps has been mostly fighter pilots, test pilots. They've been men. And we've put a lot more time, because we've had an effort into understanding male biology in space, male health in space. It's just the history of it. But now that's not good enough. So one project we'd love to do is to analyze and project the risks to female reproductive health in space. Is there a risk to female astronauts that they may have more miscarriages, they may have more fertility problems because of the radiation they've experienced or weightlessness? How can we figure this out? So the plan is to create a lot of data on Earth using, we're actually going to use rats as an animal model species. A lot of for if there are biologists in the room, this is RNA data, transcriptomic data. That's a lot of it. And do the same thing. We're going to take frozen eggs from a rat and analyze their RNA and the transcriptomics in space. That's huge, that database. We do not want to downlink it. But what we will do is use that fluid technique to train a little bit of the model in space, a little bit of the model on Earth, and combine the two to become a predictive model to help us understand what can we use to predict how female health in space is going to evolve over time? Are certain women with certain DNA markers more at risk than others, et cetera? Really important. Because the thing is, space it doesn't look dangerous here. This is finally a moment of relaxation for this astronaut. Jessica Meir, she's quite famous because each astronaut gets a very limited budget for how much they can carry into space. They weigh it. It's like, you're allowed, this many grams. She used almost all of her budget on a saxophone. That's how important it was. Good for her. But believe it, these are brave people. These are like the individuals I showed you earlier in Antarctica. It's hard. So the least we can do, the least you can do, is to give them every bit of assistance you can to make them safe, to make them successful, to keep them healthy during the mission, to keep them healthy when they come home. They need your help. And I think you will be more successful in helping them if you use AI as a tool than if you try to go it alone. And that's my belief. And I think that's good for humanity. I think it's good for all of us. And on that note, I want to thank you for allowing me to tell you why I'm excited about AI, acknowledge why we need to be careful, but most importantly, to thank IBERO and AEM for allowing me to come here to speak to you. That's why I said I'm here to see you, not the other way around. Remember, you're the ones that are going to do this. So I really hope some of these ideas have encouraged you to get involved in AI for the good of humanity. There's so much we can do. Thank you kindly.
Muchas gracias a Graham por compartir su conocimiento. Iniciaremos el foro de preguntas y respuestas. Le pido al doctor Eduardo Gamaliel y al licenciado Guillermo Castro puedan alternar la lectura de preguntas de nuestro auditorio. Cuando puedan, por favor.
Thank you, Dr. Graham, for your talk. So we have a QR code, then you can access and put your questions, and then we can read the question and to select some of these for Dr. Graham or for my colleagues in this moment. I have the first question. What are the ethical principles raised in space exploration using artificial intelligence?
I'm going to start by asking you to repeat the question. I'm so sorry.
Yes. What are the ethical problems or principles in space exploration with artificial intelligence?
Well, I think there's some ethical considerations for space exploration in general, and those will be accelerated with AI. I think space law, as a representation of our belief of what is right and wrong and fair in space, is a fascinating thing. There's the Space Act Agreement, there's the new Artemis agreements that are being signed by many countries. Probably the most important we've talked about, and you may have heard about, is an agreement to not put weapons of mass destruction in orbit and in space. But those right away get us into an area of space and warfare and things like that. The question was about exploration. And even then, how do you decide who owns something that is discovered? You go to the moon, we know we're going to be looking very actively for water deposits. Believe it or not, the moon looks, you've all probably heard, it's dead, it's dry, there's nothing there. Turns out that at the North and South Pole, there are craters that are so deep that the bottoms of those craters never see sunlight, ever. They're always shaded. And over millions and millions of years with comet impacts on the moon and other things, molecules of water have been deposited there and are still there, frozen, ice on the moon. Water is everything for survival. You can drink it, you can separate it into hydrogen and oxygen. Oxygen you breathe, hydrogen and oxygen is rocket fuel. It's important for so many reasons, which is why, I don't know if you knew this, but in about 3 hours, we hope there will be another NASA lunar lander on the South Pole. In 3 hours, we'll find out. We're all looking at the North and South Pole for all that ice. Now, what happens when you find it? Who owns it? What are the ethics of sharing that resource? Who owns Antarctica? It's so odd, right? It's like a little pie that's been sliced up. Is that a model for how we should treat the moon? These are questions I wonder about, just because I think we all should wonder about them. AI, I think it accelerates our path to some of those issues, makes them very real quicker. I think it introduces some interesting ethical considerations that are unique to AI. So, for example, AI and healthcare, which you saw me talk about. What happens when decisions made by an AI system, doctors become so reliant on them that they're no longer treated like advice, they're treated like the truth. I don't know, I never get it right. It always gets it right. I'm just going to agree with what it says. You know, and whether that doctor is in space or on the ground doesn't matter. These are fascinating ethical issues. And I guess I don't know I can tell you where I can see difficult ethical questions arising. I don't know the answer because AI is advancing so fast compared to our policies on how to use it. And that was one of the problems. The elephant in the room, remember, right? We need to address that. But it's a wonderful question. I quite agree. That's something we need to think about.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, everybody hears me? Okay. Dr. Graham, what should the education field be teaching to the new generations? And it says, not only the Mars generation.
Yes. Not just the Mars generation. Maybe I was too selective. But education is where it starts. It's the investment that universities, but also the governments and so on, make in you, and the return on investment is the betterment of that country, the betterment of that society, and of the world. So what investments should be made in AI? I have a few thoughts on areas that I see as being kind of potential limits to how quickly AI can develop, and one of them is the sheer cost and power requirements to build some of these models. Again, you may have heard of ChatGPT as an example. People might not realize this, but it costs hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in electricity alone to train these models. They're huge. How might we bypass that and do better for the planet? We really don't need any more energy being wasted. Is there a way around this to do better? So I would encourage, one line of thought is, how can we do artificial intelligence in a way that maybe isn't quite so expensive computationally in the training process? Remember when I showed you that back propagation where it kind of figures out what went wrong? That's expensive. Once you've trained the model, it's very cheap, it's very fast, it doesn't take much power. It's the training that's hard. And so there's really interesting research being done in areas like quantum computing combined with AI, where it kind of bypasses the complexity of that back propagation. It uses quantum fields to kind of collapse immediately on the right answer, just as one example. I'm going to take a little bit of a liberty in your question in saying, you asked what should you invest in academically to make sure that all the generations are helping to contribute to AI being used in the right way for all of us and in space. I would argue that part of the answer is how AI is invested into education to make education better. And I mentioned this before with Erika. It's a fantastic thing. Think of how many brilliant people are in the world with IQs that the world would love to have working for it, who just never get that education. If you read stories of Einstein and whoever, it almost seems like pure luck that the right brain was in the right place to get the right education to actually make a difference. So if you can use AI to democratize education and personalize education for everybody, there's nothing you can do that would make more of an impact for all of us. I think it's going to be amazing. I think it's probably the thing I'm most excited about.
Just another question is,
Mr. Mackintosh, it's an honor, and as a law student, it's of great interest to me knowing your opinion and how AI may affect the future of the practice of law, like lawyers, judges, etc. Others. Thank you.
Well, I'll answer your question in two parts. One, I'll just think about some things that seem to be emerging in the field of law and litigation and how AI is affecting it. But then I'll speak specifically to space law, which is an emerging field we need to understand better. So I think that how does it affect law in general? I would say I'll give you two examples. One is on the profession itself. There are some examples which may be unsettling for people learning law or practicing law, where AI systems do an extremely good job of, let's say, taking a contract and highlighting areas of risk. That used to be done by, paralegals or, a fairly high-paid position to accurately go, that's not clear, this is a problem. Now it's done in a few seconds. So interestingly, the profession of law and understanding the clarity of communication and the risks to a client given a certain contract, et cetera, these are all things that AI is having an impact. That's true for all our fields. By the way, I make a business, my business is writing code. AI can write code. We have to get used to that and embrace it and figure out how to adapt around it. Now, that is how AI affects the legal profession in terms of what they do. They need to elevate themselves above some of these, I shouldn't call it rote, but basic tasks. But AI introduces whole new problems, like how do you define intellectual property when the AI system is learning on its own and creating it on its own? Who owns that intellectual property? Supposing someone takes a large language model, an LLM like ChatGPT or Gemini from Google, takes that model, trains it in a different way, and produces brand new IP from that. Does Google own any of that IP? Does the person who trained the model own IP? What happens when a model just goes out on its own and goes through the internet in whatever way it pleases and learns something new, creates an invention? Who owns that? How do you patent it? It's a really interesting problem. So I think the fact that you ask it as a question is partly because of that being, policy being your area of expertise. But I think it's also because I think you sense that AI is getting ahead of our understanding. And I think you're absolutely right. I think the policies we want to use in terms of how AI is best applied, how do we partner with AI as its intelligence appears to grow, and how do you discern if something right and wrong, if something bad happens, an autonomous car crashes and someone's injured, who's liable? In the case of a car that's driven by a human, they do analysis to see if it's the driver or the car. Now the driver and the car are one thing. The driver may have evolved, the autonomous system may have learned from its human driver a little. It's very complex. Maybe the driver took over control from time to time, and the autonomous system learned driving behavior from that person. Now who's liable? Tough to know. We're so far ahead. Maybe I'm saying to you, you need to work harder. You have to catch up. The policymakers, I'm sure, feel a little bit behind. It's uncomfortable. But the opportunities are wonderful too. It's not just scary. There's some good things happening.
Thank you.
I have other question. What about your recommendation of a way or roadmap to learn the concepts or basis of machine learning or deep reinforcement learning?
So a roadmap to the basis of machine learning? Yes. Meaning a roadmap to make the most of it, or maybe I misunderstood your question. I'm so sorry to have you clarify. It's my fault.
To understand the basis, maybe for people that is not studying and engineering.
Understood.
Yes.
Sure. Okay, so if just to sort of get the foundation, I did that a little bit at the beginning of my presentation. Maybe that was helpful. I know I emphasized a lot the area of AI and the roadmap to understanding it for neural networks. That just happens to be the area that I'm most involved in. I like it because I think ultimately it shows the most promise. But your question's a good one because in general, AI is any system, computing system, that improves through use, learns more from the data that it's expected to analyze. And there are there's a bit of a gray area between what's just statistics and statistically driven systems versus AI, real intelligence. Support vector machines, k-means, classifiers. I mean, these are all actually pretty quickly understandable statistical methods to classify and cluster data to allow you to then take new data you've never seen before and classify it and say, okay, based on all the other data you just showed me, let's say about lung cancer, now you're showing me blood samples, x-rays, whatever. I think this person has lung cancer, or I don't think they do. You're using past experience of analyzing data to do a good job of analyzing new data. So if the roadmap is somewhat the roadmap I use is not to jump to the conclusion you've got to go immediately to the coolest new AI, the neural nets and the expensive things with GPUs and all this stuff. Sometimes the roadmap is to be very modest in your demands of the system. I often go first to statistical models, very, very basic ones, just to get a shape of the data and understand how it's structured and go, wow, that actually worked really well. I don't think I need any of this neural net stuff. Don't assume you have to jump to the thing that seems to emulate human intelligence the best in order to get AI working for you. Think of it this way. A fish swims. Do you think a submarine swims? Would you use that verb, swim, for submarine? Probably not. It goes under the water really fast, like a fish. So AI doesn't have to think like you in order to think. A submarine doesn't have to swim to go quickly under the water. Right? So remember that you can get machine learning benefits that are phenomenal on a laptop, just nothing more. I do it all the time with data when I'll take on a sample. So be progressive in how ambitious and complex a model you want to apply. I didn't go through the statistical examples in my presentation, but if you just Google that, look for k-means or a support vector machine, any mathematician, any statistician, any of us, you can get a pretty quick understanding of it. I encourage you to do that. It helps a lot.
Okay, let's continue with another question from the audience. How would you tackle the problem of AI over-adapting to a specific problem in space exploration?
Yeah, over-adaptation and overtraining is sometimes called overfitting. It's where you have data that you train to the point where the model seems to be fantastic, does a great job. It just models every data point you have perfectly. But you've over-adapted and overfit because it hasn't generalized. Right, so I'm going to wave my hands in the air a bit, but you can follow. If you have all these data points and you fit a curve to it to go through every data point, wiggling and wobbling down the through every point, that's overfitting. Because you haven't got the overall trend, which is like this. AI can do the equivalent of that. And what often happens is it's very brittle. Brittle in the, as an analogy, it means that it breaks easily when it's outside of its comfort zone. And so the challenge of over-adapting, whoever asked that question, very, very insightful. Great question, because we don't have a lot of space data, especially about, let's say, astronaut health. We're just beginning the exploration. And so we haven't yet realized what's normal, what's not normal, what's an exception. So that's where the techniques like I described, where you make more data to help it generalize, comes into play. So I'll shorten the answer because I know we're getting near the limit of our time and there may be other questions. I'll shorten it by saying just this one example. One of the ways to deal with data bias and overfitting is to generate more data, to extrapolate from what you already have and generalize that data to get a larger data set, and it encourages a training technique for the model that avoids the overfitting, which is not a good thing. That's a very whoever asked that question, I want you to do you're the AI person we want. That was great.
Thank you, Dr. Graham.
Thank you very much. And this person signs us first time using AI, and the question is, when was your first approach with AI?
So when did I first get into AI, or?
When was your first approach with AI?
Okay, and by approach, I think that means sort of encounter with it, or when I got involved in developing it? Yes. Okay, I'll take it that way. When did I get it started? It's kind of funny, Guillermo told me about his first experience with computers when he was 10, 11. You had Sinclair, and you were programming in BASIC. So I'm older than Guillermo, that's why I have more gray hair, right? And I started when I was 10 too. I had a little tiny computer with 4 kilobytes. There was no AI on that. I was also learning BASIC. But it got me started thinking about how incredible it was that this thing seemed to understand the formula that I was giving it, the program. From there, my first experience with real AI work was in Toronto. I worked for a company called Canadian Pacific. Now, they're a communication transportation conglomerate, big company. And they had back then airlines and railways and telecommunications infrastructure. And here was the problem. The problem they had was they wanted to know when should they take a locomotive engine. So this is Canadian Pacific Railways, CP Rail. When could they take a locomotive engine and say, that one's fine, you can go all the way from Montreal to Vancouver, all the way over the Rocky Mountains, no problem. And also predict the maintenance and say, well, that one, I'm not so sure. We should take that one and have it checked out. Now, the way they were doing that with human experts is they had put trace metals into all of the engine components. Each cylinder had different trace metals in it, copper, tin, whatever. So when engine parts were wearing, that would go into the oil. So you use a spectrogram to analyze the oil and say, oh, we got a lot of copper. That cylinder number 7 is wearing. That's not good. Now, I oversimplified. It was all kinds of different metals and trends over time. They had a person in Montreal who was super good at this. Absolutely amazing. We didn't know how he did it. He just sort of looked at the data and went, that one's fine, this one's good. He didn't even know how he did it. And this is way back in 1988. They wanted us, he was going to retire. He was going to leave. And then what? So they wanted to capture his knowledge, his rules of thumb, his heuristics, the magic way in which he just looked and went, yeah, that one's fine, this one is. They wanted us to capture that. And we tried. We interviewed him. We used all kinds of clever techniques, we thought, to listen, even timing him and watching videotape and seeing how quickly, down to the millisecond, that he would say certain things and infer rules of thumb. We tried and tried and tried, and we couldn't do it. So strangely, my first encounter with AI was not that successful. And that's, among other things, why AI kind of boomed in the 1980s. Everyone went, oh my God, it's going to change the world. Computers are going to be as smart as us in no time. And then it crashed because we overextended our expectations. We had to go through the AI winter, as it's called, with no money. And that really only changed sort of 2000, 2003. It started to really take off again because finally we realized that what made the difference was not interviewing the human expert, it's analyzing enormous amounts of data. So the internet had to mature, and GPUs as a processing infrastructure for doing that very mathematically complicated back propagation, all of that had to come together to get this new way of thinking about AI with a lot of data. So my first encounter was late 80s, and then the AI winter happened, and that was no fun, and now I'm happy again.
Thank you very much.
Tenemos varias preguntas. Lo que vamos a hacer es facilitárselas para que nos pueda ayudar a responderlas y las publicaremos en el sitio para que todos puedan verlas. Yo nada más voy a hacer la última pregunta para continuar con el programa. This is going to be the last question. Are harms identified in the use of AI, and what do you suppose to prevent or reduce them?
Okay, and the first word in that, I'm so sorry, my hearing is terrible. It's not you, it's me.
No, don't worry. Are harms identified in the use of AI? And what do you propose to prevent or reduce them?
Okay, harms as in things that hurt us, you mean?
Yes.
Yes, understood, yeah. It's a profound question, so it's suitable that it's the last question because it's sort of the overarching question we all have. Are we sure we understand where AI does good and where AI does not do good? Do we understand that? Do we know how to control it? And that's why I really wanted to make sure at the beginning I acknowledged the difficulty in doing that. I think it's fair to say that any technology that has progressed very, very quickly, nuclear science and particle physics and the evolution of nuclear weapons is an example, that accelerated so fast, it, I think, arguably got ahead of society's ability to know how, is this good, is this bad, does this protect us, does this make us less safe? Hard to know. Let's say genetics and the possibility of genetic engineering. I mean, so many wonderful things can come from that. Hereditary diseases brought to an end, genetic therapies. But it's scary as well. What happens when we start to genetically modify animals, people? What, is that allowed? Should we do that? Or do we say, no, you don't do it. Just because you can, you don't. I mean, so my point is, technologies always bring the good-bad problem. That was my point earlier. It amplifies what we are. And we're complicated. Sometimes we're good, sometimes not so good. Technologies that accelerate quickly make that harder, because it gets ahead of our ability to really internalize, what does this do for us? How do we manage it? How do we protect ourselves from some of the problems this introduces? It's new power in our hands. Whilst opening up and making the most of the good. So hard. And AI is for sure one of these technologies that's moved very quickly. It's tough. And, as I pointed out, it's a bit unique. It's not just accelerating quickly. It introduces all kinds of new issues, like the fact that it can change itself. That did a terrible thing, but not my fault. I didn't make that happen. It was behaving perfectly fine when I was in charge. But then it went off and learned something else and did the wrong thing. I mean, so hard to control and predict the good applications from the bad applications. I wish I had an answer. I think if you listen carefully to the people far smarter than me who really study this from a sociological perspective, that they're scratching their heads too, right? It's a big challenge. I pray that we manage to figure this out. I guess I'm a little bit, how can I put it? I'm hiding from your question a little bit in terms of how I deal with it. My confession is I don't try to directly address, how do we use AI for good and AI for bad? It's so complicated. I don't know the answer either. So that's why I'm so happy to be doing this at NASA, because just in general, I find exploration is a good thing. It's uplifting. It's exciting for all of us. It unifies the world, and we all need that right now. So that's where I go, and I hope that helps.
Muchas gracias al panel, a nuestra comunidad y a Graham por sus participaciones. Pedimos al Dr. Gamaliel pueda hacer entrega de un obsequio en nombre de la Universidad Iberoamericana. Antes de despedirnos, queremos invitar a la comunidad universitaria a participar en las actividades de la IBERO. Les invitamos al India Day en la explanada central de la universidad y el próximo 5 de marzo el ciclo de conferencias impartidas por el Encuentro Mexicano de Ingenierías de Encuatería Experimental en MINS. Querida comunidad, hemos llegado al final del evento. En nombre de la Universidad Iberoamericana Ciudad de México y de la Dirección de Educación Continua, agradecemos nuevamente la colaboración de la Agencia Espacial Mexicana, al igual que el apoyo de nuestros patrocinadores, GEMED, CDO y Valencia del Toro. Gracias a todas y todos por su presencia en esta conferencia magistral. Pasen muy buena tarde y hasta pronto.